What I am suggesting is what Dixieland had in mind. Reasonable, qualified people sitting down and considering whether or not they perceive a given piece of reporting warrants holding it up to public scrutiny as flawed, as dishonest. And if it is, then let the public know about it.
Fort Marcy Park, just outside of Washington, D.C. Today it is tranquil, but on July 20th, 1993, a body was found here. Suddenly, this roadside park was transformed into the epicenter of a volatile controversy involving the death of one of the highest law enforcement officials in the land, a man who served the President of the United States as Deputy White House Counsel. The man's name was Vincent Foster. Known for his devotion to his children, Foster made his final public appearance at the University of Arkansas Law School just 2 months prior to his death.
Balance wisely your professional life and your family life. If you are fortunate to have children, your parents will warn you that your children will grow up and be gone before you know it. I can testify that it is true. God only allows us so many opportunities with our children to read a story, go fishing, play catch, say our prayers together. Try not to miss a one of them.
At first, everyone close to Foster expressed shock upon hearing the news that he had committed suicide. Soon, the White House had developed its own explanation, one that characterized Foster as being deeply depressed about the Travelgate scandal and a mildly critical editorial which appeared in the Wall Street Journal. That official story, although initially balked at by 1 or 2 members of the press, was willingly accepted by all others in the media, and the case was quickly forgotten. In addition to his duties as White House counsel, Foster was also the Clintons' personal attorney and was privy to their most personal business dealings. That fact became critical when it was revealed that on the night of Foster's death, high-ranking Clinton aides illegally ransacked Foster's office. Veteran Secret Service officer Henry O'Neill testified under oath that he saw Hillary's chief of staff, Margaret Williams, removing documents from Foster's office. Foster's secretary also testified under oath that the special index to Clinton's personal business papers had disappeared from Foster's office file as well. What was Foster working on in the days before his death? What knowledge did he possess that was so worrisome to the Clintons and their associates? These questions have yet to be answered. As the rest of the national media focused its attention on the office break-in and the ensuing Whitewater scandal, seasoned New York Post investigative reporter Christopher Ruddy began detailing the innumerable inconsistencies in the Foster death. Ruddy became the first journalist to interview emergency workers and park police officers who were on the scene that night, and what he discovered was chilling indeed.
I was very surprised that many of them had grave doubts or reservations about the death, and when I asked them why, one of the things they told me was that they saw very little blood at the scene. George Gonzalez, who was the lead paramedic, the first senior officer from Fairfax County to find the body, said that he had never seen a suicide like this in 13 years.
As a consultant for the House Select Committee on Assassinations, Vincent Scalise has more than 40 years' experience as a homicide investigator.
Most of the blood should be located at the exit wound. When I say blood, that would include probably brain matter, possibly fragments of bone. It would be located at the around the wound itself, around the vegetation, and we should expect massive pooling in a situation like this.
After supposedly placing an old Colt .38 revolver in his mouth, Foster is said to have blown out a large area from the back of his head, as depicted here in his official autopsy report.
In a gunshot wound of this type, you would expect massive amounts of blood. Blood all over the place. It would really be, in common terms, it would be a mess.
Instead of finding a mess, police and emergency workers arrived on a scene strangely devoid of blood. Kevin Fornshill, the the first park police officer at the scene described it this way.
A lot of blood?
No.
So there was some blood. Where was the blood?
There was, I remember sort of a faint trickle in the corner of the mouth. Dry and just something you might get from maybe biting your tongue into your mouth.
I see. So it wasn't even running at that point?
No, just a very small trace of dry blood.
One of the more astounding things I learned was from Corey Ashford, the EMT worker, the emergency worker that put Foster's body into a body bag to help remove it from Fort Marcy. Corey had very close contact with the body because, according to Corey, he took his hands, put them under Foster's shoulders, under his arms, cradled Foster's head in his arms, picked the body up. Foster's about 200 pounds, so he has people helping him at the other end of the body, and placed it inside a plastic body bag. So Corey, therefore, should have a very good memory of what took place and what he saw. And I was astounded. I had a taped interview with him. He said that he didn't see any exit wound.
I was the one that picked up the body.
You picked up the body. Was the body already in plastic when you picked it up?
No, we put it in the bag.
I see. In terms of blood, was there an exit wound in the back of the head? Do you remember?
To be honest with you, I did not see any blood or an exit.
But a lot of people have commented that there wasn't much blood in this one.
There was no blood. I didn't see any blood.
You didn't see any? And there were no pools of blood or anything like that?
No, there was no blood.
You would expect to see large amounts of blood, brain tissue, possibly bone matter that would have exited from the rear of the head, because the exit wound naturally is much larger than the entrance wound.
Later, Ashford was interviewed by the FBI. He didn't deny this. He even went further. He said that not only did he not see any blood, that after the task, he didn't even bother washing his hands.
It's unheard of. I've never seen anything like it before. This would indicate to me that this did not take place at that location. It took place someplace else.
EMT worker Corey Ashford was not alone. Of the more than 20 people on the scene that night, no one saw any blood or tissue in the area surrounding the body. Upon his return to the fire station that night, Ashford classified the death in his official report as a homicide. Likewise, EMT worker Richard Arthur told the FBI Foster could not possibly have killed himself, citing a wound in Foster's neck, which was totally inconsistent with suicide. Photographic evidence, as well as at least 3 other emergency workers testifying under oath, would eventually confirm Arthur's claims. The official suicide in the park ruling was a hoax. Reddy's reports in the New York Post had a devastating effect. As a result, the Justice Department announced that Special Counsel Robert Fisk would be conducting a full homicide investigation into Foster's death. Reddy had earlier gained notoriety after breaking a story exposing a fraudulent taxpayer-funded PBS documentary entitled Liberators. As confirmed by New York Magazine and the New Republic, the Liberators story had indeed been fabricated. Reddy received high praise for his investigation, which led to the unprecedented action by PBS to withdraw the film. Especially thankful were the African-American soldiers who had been so maligned by PBS.
Chris Reddy found out that this was an absolute lie. He spoke to officers in my unit. He spoke to me. He read books. I don't know how they thought they could camouflage this lie.
Purple Heart winner E.G. McConnell was one of those who had been featured in the documentary.
Chris Reddy really brought it to the attention of the public. Over 3,700,000 people saw this movie on television. Then it had a companion book telling the same lie. And Chris Reddy, he was very persistent. He really got to the bottom. They didn't want any part of him. So I was very happy with that, because the truth has to be told.
On June 30th, 1994, the Fisk report on the death of Vince Foster was issued, confirming suicide as the cause of death. The report was praised by the national media, the Justice Department, the President, and nearly every member of Congress, Republican and Democrat alike. Ruddy quickly responded to the Fisk report by pointing out dozens of areas where Fisk had misrepresented testimony, fabricated evidence, or simply lied. Ruddy also noted that Fisk had engaged in a cover-up by exempting the investigation from a grand jury. Aware of the escalating cover-up, journalist Ambrose Evans Pritchard, Washington correspondent for the prestigious London Telegraph, joined the investigation.
Critical information was simply left out of the final Fisk report. It's quite clear that Robert Fisk was systematically suppressing evidence. And what we've discovered is there's been a pattern of misrepresentation of witness statements by the original crime scene witnesses. Everything of significance that they saw was eliminated from the final Fisk report.
As a result of the reporting of Christopher Ruddy, Ambrose Evans Pritchard, and others, Robert Fisk's secret ties to Bill Clinton were made public. In addition to his own ties to the Whitewater scandal, Fisk had worked closely with President Clinton in the unprecedented scheme to fire FBI Director William Sessions and replace him with Louis Freeh. Sessions himself has charged that his firing the day before Foster's death led to a seriously compromised investigation. Subsequently, a 3-judge panel fired Robert Fisk on August 4th, 1994, and replaced him with Kenneth Starr. Ruddy continued to report for the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review, contacting more eyewitnesses and uncovering evidence which implicated the Park Police, the FBI, Robert Fisk, and even Kenneth Starr's office in the cover-up of Foster's death. On December 13, 1994, this secret confidential White House memo was drafted, which detailed a myriad of scandals facing the Clintons, along with the attorneys assigned to defuse each scandal. Among the highest of Clinton White House concerns was Foster's death. According to the memo, Christopher Ruddy had been singled out for neutralization.
The White House had prepared a task list of things, all these problems that were cropping up, the scandals that were embarrassing them. And the only journalist named in this long list of items was Chris Ruddy. This obviously shows the White House was very much concerned about what Ruddy was doing.
According to the secret memo, the White House planned to smear Ruddy using the press, with attorney Jim Hamilton coordinating the effort. Described in the memo as a White House surrogate, Hamilton was none other than the Foster family's own attorney. Shortly after the memo was drafted, Ruddy received a call from 60 Minutes.
Mike Wallace's assistant producer called me and asked if I would cooperate with 60 Minutes in producing and in their research and producing a segment on the Vince Foster case. And he was very clear and explicit in stating that the reason why 60 Minutes and Mike Wallace wanted to do this was to get to the unanswered questions, to tell the American public all the facts about this case and why it was problematic. That it wasn't intended to be a criticism of me and other people that had been pursuing the truth on this story.
Ruddy agreed to help 60 Minutes with their investigation. At the time, he was unaware of the secret White House memo and had no idea he was being set up.
What really happened to Vince Foster? Did President Clinton's friend and Deputy White House counsel kill himself, or was he murdered? Foster's body was found in Fort Marcy Park outside Washington more than 2 years ago, but still, we read stories about his death almost every day, and just as often viewers write or call asking us to investigate. So we have taken a look at what really happened to him and what kind of a man he was.
Not surprisingly, when the show did air in October of 1995, it was Jim Hamilton who appeared as Ruddy's chief critic.
The overwhelming evidence is that he took his life there. Everybody that has looked at this, Mike, every professional body, every government body has made that conclusion.
The 60 Minutes segment essentially was to try to discredit everything I do, to destroy me as a person, not just to destroy the story, but puncture Chris Ruddy's credibility, not give him one shred of credibility, because that may give credibility to the hundreds and hundreds of issues that I raised, which they knew that they couldn't deal with.
They spent more than half the time on air talking about Chris Ruddy's work and a lot less time looking at the underlying questions of what happened at Fort Marcy Park and trying to answer some of these still anomalous difficulties in that case. So I think they really missed an opportunity to get to the bottom of this and instead went after a very hard-working journalist.
They went into it with the idea of showing that Foster committed suicide in the park, just like the park police and the Fisk report said. That was what they set out to do. But instead of going to Chris Ruddy to get the truth, they went at it with the point of view of trying to make him look bad, make it look as though he didn't know what he was talking about. And they do this, of course, not in the interview. They do it in the editing room.
During the interview, Ruddy presented Wallace with a vast amount of documented information, none of which ever made it into the program. When the unedited transcript of the 3-hour interview was compared to the final edited version of the program, it was obvious Ruddy had been edited out of context and cut off in mid-sentence in an effort to make him appear incoherent.
You've sold thousands of these things. It features, as the investigative reporter, you.
Right.
Did you go over the script ahead of time?
I did look at the script a number of times.
Do you genuinely believe that he was rolled up in a carpet and brought there?
I don't have any evidence that he was rolled up in a carpet.
Why? This is your tape.
Mike, it's
You went over it. You edited it.
No.
It's the height of unfairness for a powerful organization like CBS to use its resources to do a hatchet job in this way on the one journalist who's out there in the field putting his career on the line trying to investigate this.
They barely let me speak at all. Most of the times Wallace was interrupting me or they wouldn't let me finish a sentence. If they had allowed me to complete a full sentence, and I do happen to speak in full sentences, that would have been very, very dangerous for them.
You can take tiny segments, only a couple of seconds long, of a short question and a short answer, and put that out of context into the segment, and again make the interviewee look extremely bad. That is exactly what was done with Chris Ruddy on 60 Minutes.
Mike Wallace hosted this thing. I watched his program. I recorded it. And I became angrier and angrier. But then again, I said to myself, Chris is my friend. I know this is a shameful thing to be humiliated like that on TV, but eventually the truth will rise up above and we'll all know, everyone will know what's going on.
I think the proof of the pudding in regard to Chris Ruddy was that very shortly after the 60 Minutes piece aired, Chris Ruddy was on Accuracy in Media's television program, The Other Side of the Story. Now that was live, and in that piece, Chris was extremely sharp. It was obvious that he knew the Vince Foster case inside out.
In fact, George Gonzalez, what did he say?
Well, George Gonzalez, the lead paramedic, had never seen so little blood for a gunshot wound. Corey Ashford saw no blood, didn't use gloves, didn't wash his hands after the incident. Arthur had the same conclusion, there was little blood. Mike Wallace kept on saying, well, there's been all of these different investigations, FBI Fisk and Congressman Klinger. What he didn't want to tell his viewers was this, that the day before Foster died, William Sessions, the head of the FBI, was fired. Foster was found dead the next day. Sessions, in a statement to me, charged that this led to a, quote, compromised investigation, unquote, into Foster's death. Mike asked me to fax Sessions' statement to him. I did it. He didn't want you to know that because if the original investigation was compromised, we know the park police, who have no experience really in dealing high-level homicide cases, if the original one was compromised, all the rest of them are in doubt.
It was very, very impressive the way that he came off on camera, but that wasn't taped and then edited by producers. So all in all, the 60 Minutes piece, really, the long and short of it is, it was a hatchet job.
As we replay this portion of the broadcast, take note of the excessive number of edits which were employed by 60 Minutes, keeping in mind that each edit represents an area where information has been deleted. Notice that both Ruddy and Wallace get cut off in mid-sentence, and that Wallace's arms are in a different position in each scene, a clear indication that the shots did not occur in real time. What remains is a conversation that in reality never took place, as depicted here, but was created in the editing room of CBS.
Chris Ruddy is not writing that the body was removed.
Who's Jack Wheeler? Is he a reporter?
He's a columnist for the Strategic Investment newsletter.
What's his specialty?
I don't know.
Is he an investigator?
No.
Is
he was a narrator for the film, just as much as you are a narrator. You know, maybe he doesn't know as much about the case as I do or as you do, that he was just reading a script.
You've sold thousands of these things. It features, as the investigative reporter, you.
Right.
Did you go over the script ahead of time?
I did look at the script a number of times.
Do you genuinely believe that he was rolled up in a carpet and brought there?
I don't have any evidence that he was rolled up in a carpet.
Why? This is your tape.
Mike, it's
You went
not...
over it. You edited it.
No.
This is why so many people who are knowledgeable about 60 Minutes techniques refuse to go on and do interviews with him. Offered to go on, we'll do it live, but we're not going to let you edit the film in a way that will distort what we have to say. And that is precisely what they did in this case.
In addition to the attack on Ruddy, Wallace went after 2 videos that had been produced dealing with Foster's death. The first video, The Death of Vince Foster, What Really Happened, was produced and distributed not by Jerry Falwell's organization, but by Citizens for Honest Government. This is how the title sequence appears in the actual video. And this is how it appeared in the 60 Minutes program.
The ads ask for contributions to keep Ruddy investigating. And Ruddy's reporting is the basis for 2 videotapes. One distributed by the Reverend Jerry Falwell's organization, the other produced by a newsletter called Strategic Investment.
Notice how the title, which clearly identifies the video as a presentation of Citizens for Honest Government, was edited out by 60 Minutes. By deceptively attributing the video to the Reverend Jerry Falwell, Wallace tried simply to dismiss it as the product of right-wing fanatics out to get Clinton.
And you believe that it's simply a cynical attempt to go after Bill Clinton?
To show the administration in the least favorable light.
The same holds true for the second video, produced by James Davidson of Strategic Investment, one of the country's most respected financial newsletters. In this case, 60 Minutes deceptively failed to inform its audience of Davidson's background.
Jim Davidson was a big-time contributor to Bill Clinton. He gave the maximum in a campaign contribution to Bill Clinton in his 1992 campaign for president. He was in communication with Bill Clinton for years. It's very difficult to believe that Jim Davidson is somebody who was out to get Bill Clinton.
Even though 60 Minutes knew, Strategic's distributor, the Western Journalism Center, sold only 1,000 videos and had made $30,000. The program falsely reported they had earned $500,000.
The Western Journalism Center says, as of several months ago, that they had made about $500,000 off their endeavors dealing with the Foster death.
When 60 Minutes repeated this segment in the summer of 1996, this outright lie had been quietly edited out. Yet Wallace failed to tell his audience why.
They implied very strongly that the reason that we were pursuing this case and trying to develop a public concern about it was that this was all a money-grubbing activity and that we'd made vast amounts of money allegedly selling a video on the point. And I publicly suggested that we would be glad to pay Mike Wallace twice the amount of money that all these millions that we allegedly made if he would come on a public stage and debate the facts, which of course he refused to do.
The Strategic Investment video detailed Ruddy's reporting and also included a statement based on a story which first appeared in the Boston Globe that Vincent Foster was left-handed. When Strategic Investment learned of the Globe's error, they quickly corrected it. Although Wallace was well aware of the fact that it was the Boston Globe who had made the mistake, he deceptively tried to pin it on Ruddy.
The report that Foster was left-handed, which was a reasonable thing for us to pick up on because it appeared in the Boston Globe based upon an interview with the Park Police. It was reported as a fact in the newspapers. We did not sit around and hatch up this notion that he was left-handed.
60 Minutes, so it was so desperate to attack my reporting and to attack the credibility of these videos that were out there, they pinned someone else's mistake on us.
Here's another mistake.
Why the left-handed Mr. Foster was found clutching the .38 caliber Colt in his right hand.
No mystery. The fact is that Foster was right-handed, not left-handed. Ruddy acknowledged that error and later tried to distance himself from the tape, but the fact remains that he edited the script.
I said to Mike Wallace during the interview, whatever you put on the air, you put on the air, but I ask you to just put on some very simple facts, and it'll only take 30 seconds. Tell the American people that the gun in his hand was not owned by Foster, that it was found in his hand with none of his fingerprints on it, that the gun was found in his hand and it appeared visibly clean. Nobody saw any blood on it, even though it was shot in his mouth in close contact to his skin. Highly unusual, should have been blood all over it. That there were homes across the street, no one heard the gunshot. That they never found the fired bullet. That the gunpowder residues on Foster's left and right hand, according to 7 leading experts, Wallace had their names, and indicated neither hand was on the gun's grip when it was fired. Totally inconsistent with suicide. I mean, all of these things in themselves are very serious. That statement never made it on the air.
The climatic moment in the program came when Wallace deceived his 60 Minutes audience by suggesting Ruddy had simply fabricated the report regarding the lack of blood at the scene.
Well, Dr. Hout, in his FBI report and his interview with me, said there was not a lot of blood behind the body.
Dr. Donald Hout, you are the Fairfax County medical examiner.
Yes, I am.
Was there a suspicious lack of blood at the scene?
Absolutely not.
Did you tell a reporter by the name of Christopher Ruddy that there was an unusual lack of blood?
No.
Do you know what Dr. Hout told us?
What did he tell you?
Plenty of blood for him to have died there. He told it to us. Are you suggesting that somebody got to him?
I don't know why he suddenly changed the story.
Christopher Ruddy says that you changed your story.
No, that's not true.
60 Minutes had engaged in a skillfully edited deception using Dr. Donald Hout, the medical examiner who examined Foster's body at Fort Marcy Park. Hout had made the statement to both Ruddy and the FBI that he did not see much blood at the scene.
Wallace turns to me and says, well, we've talked to Dr. Hout, and Dr. Hout says significant quantities of blood were under the body for Foster to have died there. And my immediate reaction is, uh-oh. You know, the typical Mike Wallace 60 Minutes ambush journalism, here it is. And I looked at Mike and I said, Mike, you know, my reaction was, Mike, I'm not making this up. I have a tape-recorded conversation with Dr. Hout, and I have his FBI statement. And then Wallace says to me, well, what are you saying? He changed his story? And, you know, I felt like saying, duh.
The transcript of Ruddy's unedited interview with Wallace clearly shows that Ruddy had informed Wallace of his recording of Dr. Hout. But rather than use Ruddy's tape or confront Hout with his FBI statement, Wallace chose to deliberately smear Ruddy's character before 20 million viewers.
You're persuaded that Vincent Foster committed suicide?
Yes, I am.
Dr. Hout says Ruddy simply got it wrong.
The statement that Ruddy simply got it wrong was, of course, another of Wallace's outright lies. Ruddy, in fact, had accurately quoted Dr. Hout, as evidenced by his tape recording. In addition, Wallace knew all along that Dr. Hout had no legal standing to render a suicide ruling. Under Virginia state law, Hout could only certify whether or not Foster was dead, not rule on the cause of death. Wallace deceptively failed to mention that Dr. Hout had nothing to do with Foster's autopsy, had never conducted an autopsy, and has no qualifications at all in pathology.
When I examined the transcripts of the 60 Minutes broadcast, what astonished me was the way they treated Chris Ruddy. In particular, they made it sound as if he had misrepresented what Dr. Hout, the first doctor at the crime scene, had told him. In fact, Dr. Hout had told me exactly the same as he told Chris Ruddy, that there was very little blood at the scene. And it was in Dr. Hout's FBI statement. And I understand that these were offered to 60 Minutes to buttress what Chris Ruddy was saying, and they simply refused to incorporate it in the story. And furthermore, went further than that and actually openly accused Chris Ruddy of lying. I thought that was outrageous.
Here, made public for the first time, is Dr. Hout's original, unedited, and very different version of what transpired.
There was some question originally about the amount of blood when they rolled over the body.
Yeah.
Was there blood there?
Yeah, the blood was sort of matted right in back of the skull.
right back of the head.
I see. Was there much on the ground?
Not a hell of a lot.
Some people say
it was all sort of congealed right in back of the head.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wallace and the others at 60 Minutes had deceptively avoided the key issue Ruddy had raised, that Haut's statement to Ruddy and the FBI had been misrepresented by Fisk. On page 36 of his report, Fisk claims Haut saw a large pool of blood, but when Ruddy confronted Wallace with this clear fabrication by Fisk, Wallace angrily responded, "Forget about that." Wallace and Fisk, it turns out, are good friends. Naturally, Wallace's outburst was edited from the final program.
Shortly after the program aired on 60 Minutes, I got to my answering machine, I turned it on, there was a message from Ty Kim.
Chris, it's Ty Kim calling. How are you? I hope you're well. And listen, just in the world of follow-up, I would be most interested in hearing your Dr. Haut tape, and I'd like to basically offer an opportunity for us to listen to it and review it. So perhaps you could give me a call at the office, you have the number, or just pop a copy in the mail and forward it on. Let me know either way, would you? Thanks. Bye.
And get this, they just aired a program on national television, 20 million people, making me look foolish and out to be almost a liar, just a fabricator of some information. They knew I had this tape for months now. They're calling me a week after saying that as a matter of follow-up, they want to get a copy of the tape.
To further smear Ruddy's character, the 60 Minutes segment deceptively relied on the testimony of Park Police Officer Kevin Fornshill. Wallace falsely implied Fornshill was a trained investigator, when in fact he is not. Fornshill had never seen a suicide by gunshot before.
Park Police Officer Kevin Fornshill, who discovered the body, says the ground around Foster showed no signs that he had been carried.
In your opinion, is it conceivable he could have been transported from someplace else and simply laid out here?
I'd have a real problem with that, sir.
Mike Wallace makes it seem like Officer Kevin Fornshill is a hero. I don't know where the evidence would suggest that this man did anything heroic. Officer Fornshill was the first officer, according to the record, to find Foster's body. And I think Wallace should have turned to Fornshill and asked him some very serious questions.
Questions like, why did the Park Police ruin the crime scene photos? Why did they give the crime scene evidence away to Bill Clinton? Why did they declare the death a suicide before even viewing the body? Why did they falsify the reports? And why did they lie under oath? While avoiding these pertinent questions, Wallace did make a point to bring up a lawsuit Fornshill had filed against Ruddy.
Officer Fornshill was so outraged by Ruddy's reports about sloppy police work that he filed a libel suit against Ruddy and the Western Journalism Center.
Wallace conveniently failed to mention that the lawsuit had been thrown out because the judge and later the appeals panel had ruled Ruddy had written nothing libelous about Fornshill. Once again, this sequence was quietly edited out when the segment was rebroadcast in the summer of 1996, and Wallace once again failed to tell his viewers why.
The suit itself, in my view, was ludicrous. We were sued, along with Chris Ruddy, for libeling this man. We didn't even mention him. Now, how can you, if we'd set out to libel the guy, we certainly did a lousy job of it by not even bothering to mention the guy we were supposed to be libeling. And it seems to me that it was more than slightly suspicious that this man apparently had enough money to hire aggressive lawyers to sue us for publishing something in a privately circulated newsletter, which he would not have seen under the normal course of circumstances because he was not a subscriber. So where, first of all, did he ever find out that we'd written anything? Secondly, having found it out, who paid for his legal expenses?
Wallace didn't bother to interview any of the dozens of emergency workers or eyewitnesses who had evidence contradicting the official version of events. Patrick Knowlton was one of those Wallace failed to contact.
Pat Knowlton was the first witness at the crime scene at about 4:30 that afternoon. When he arrived there was apparently a man on watch in the car park discouraging people from going up into the park, which is very suspicious and very important information in this case. Now, he went to the authorities and told them this, first the Park Police, and then later during the Fisk investigation he told the FBI. The FBI wrote this up in their report, but it was completely omitted by the final Fisk report that came out. It made no mention that there was a suspicious man on watch in the park.
I told him about the man that was in the car. He was acting very suspicious. I told him that without a doubt I could easily identify this person if they gave me a photo spread or a lineup. I could easily pick the guy out without a problem.
I was extremely disturbed by the way the Starr investigation dealt with Patrick Knowlton when he was subpoenaed to appear before the federal grand jury. In the first place, he came under intense harassment for 2 days, starting on the day in which he received his subpoena. And that's a very closely guarded secret that a subpoena had been issued. The only people who knew about it were the FBI and the Starr investigation themselves. So it raises questions as to who conducted this harassment. Furthermore, when he was called before the grand jury the next week, he was treated in a very hostile manner. Indeed, I would say it bordered on grotesque.
I was quite shocked over the way I was treated at the grand jury by Starr's prosecutors. Kenneth Starr was not there interviewing me, but John Bates and Brett Kavanaugh, who were his assistants here in Washington, just ran me through the mill. I mean, they gave me very little time to focus on what I'd seen at Fort Marcy Park.
They did not attempt to determine what he'd seen as a witness at the park. Instead, they seemed only interested in trying to discredit him as a witness. And this whole experience changed my view of the Starr investigation. Until then, I'd been willing to give them the benefit of the doubt, even though I'd been concerned about many things. But that made me wonder, really, whether the virus of corruption had taken over that investigation as well.
There were a myriad of important points Wallace neglected to even mention on the air, including the fact that at least 4 eyewitnesses had testified to seeing a briefcase in Foster's car. The park police insisted there was no briefcase, even though photographic evidence proved there was. Wallace also refused to discuss how Foster's eyeglasses inexplicably came to rest 19 feet from the body.
Mike Wallace called me. We discussed it before the program. What about the eyeglasses? He said, well, maybe he threw them away. And he decided he didn't need them anymore. And I said, but Mike, what about the gunpowder on the glasses? Oh, was there gunpowder? Yes. I said, that showed that they'd been on his face or near his face when the shot was fired.
The only way that those glasses could have flown 19 feet is if they had wings. It would be impossible, in my opinion, for the glasses, after the gun was fired, for the glasses to go forward 19 feet.
And it's very unlikely that Foster drove himself to Fort Marcy Park without his keys and managed to transport himself through telekinesis across a dusty field in the middle of a drought in summertime, 750 feet, without getting a chemical speck of dirt on his shoes.
Now, the FBI reports indicated that there were no traces of soil on the shoes that were worn by Foster. We took 3 separate tests with 3 separate pairs of shoes, and we noted soil in every instance. It would be impossible to walk through that park without getting soil on your shoes. As a matter of fact, you could see it visibly, and the FBI went through the trouble to say that microscopically they could find no traces.
Well, as evidence of Mike Wallace's dishonesty, he said that told me he did go to Fort Marcy Park, and I asked him about the fact that there was no dirt on Foster's shoes. How did he get all that distance from the parking lot up to the place where the body was found and not get his shoes dirty? And he confessed that he had made that walk himself. And I said, and did you get dirt on your shoes? And he said, yes.
I'm saying that the evidence indicated the body had been moved to the park.
But the evidence does not indicate that to any of the official investigators, all of whom concluded that the body could not have been moved.
This event did not take place in the park. There is no doubt in my mind. It's my opinion, the results of my investigation disclose that the body was undoubtedly transported to the park.
Wallace was unable to cite one item of physical evidence that would indicate that Foster died on the spot where the body was found. I challenged him on this. He tried to evade the question. He said, "What do you mean by forensic evidence?" He went to his dictionary. I said, "Physical evidence," and I persisted.
There is more evidence that the body was moved than that there is evidence that he died in the park, because there is no forensic evidence that he died in the park, contrary to what you said. You said all the forensic evidence shows that he pulled together, et cetera, et cetera. There is no forensic evidence to show that. Well, then you name me one piece of forensic evidence that proves that he died.
Read all I want.
One piece. Tell me one piece of forensic evidence that proves he died in the park.
I will. I tell you what.
One, Mike.
I
one. Just one.
You know what?
Name one. One. Just one lousy piece. I mean, you said you examined all the questions.
Yep.
So you must, and you said all the forensic evidence points to this. One piece of forensic evidence that proves he died in the park.
Read it.
One.
No matter.
Can you name one?
Just a moment.
Yeah.
You know perfectly well, Reed, that no matter what evidence, forensic or otherwise, that I...
Mike, try me. Name me one.
All right. I'll tell you what I'll do. I won't do it on the telephone. I'll put it on paper.
I am still waiting to hear from Mike Wallace in writing.
Wallace also deceptively claimed the reason all of Foster's clothes were covered with carpet fibers is because the park police placed them in the same evidence bag which resulted in cross-contamination.
And since all of Foster's clothes were put into one bag, all of his clothes would probably have fibers on them.
Mr. Wallace's statement about the carpet fibers being cross-contaminated because everything was placed in one evidence bag simply does not hold water. It makes no sense whatsoever, because Mr. Foster's jacket and I believe his tie were found in the auto, and they also had carpet fibers on them, and they were not in the same bag.
In addition, Wallace failed to tell his audience that the so-called suicide note, found without fingerprints and torn in the bottom of Foster's briefcase, had been ruled an obvious forgery by leading handwriting experts.
If we compare the formation of the cursive capital I here on the question document to the formation of the capital I here on the known document authored by Mr. Foster, we can plainly see it is not the same. It's an entirely different letter formation.
I have never seen a situation where a note or a piece of paper could be ripped up into 27 or 28 pieces, leaving no traces whatsoever of fingerprints, unless, obviously, a person wore gloves or took precautions not to leave fingerprints.
There were no fingerprints on the note. And we're to believe, I suppose, that Foster sat down in July, put on gloves to write a suicide note, and then ripped the thing into 28 bits and kept one of them, which would have had his signature, we presume. And the fact that the American people can absorb this nonsense is dangerous. We're becoming more nonsensical by the moment as we put up with this cover-up and the crime that it's designed to hide.
Wallace also refused to disclose the discrepancies regarding exactly when the White House was notified of the death.
Well, I've believed for a long time that the White House got an early tip-off about the death. The official time of notification was 8:30. I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest they knew probably by 7 o'clock. In which case, why did they falsify the documents? There must have been some purpose behind this. What did they do with that window of time? Did they in fact search Foster's office during that period?
Rather than investigate these matters for themselves, 60 Minutes relied on the statements of Republican Congressman William Clinger, falsely implying that Clinger had conducted a thorough homicide probe with a full committee.
Congressman Bill Clinger, the Republican leader on the Government Oversight Committee, launched his own investigation into Vince Foster's death. After several months, Clinger and his Oversight Committee staff concluded that Vince Foster had indeed killed himself.
You're satisfied that Vincent Foster killed himself?
I am, and I really feel that I perhaps have had exposure to more of the information involving that death than any other member of Congress.
Congressman Clinger, who's the chairman of the Government Reorganization Committee in the House, told 60 Minutes that he knows more about this subject than any member of Congress. And although I have high regard for Representative Klinger, he never interviewed the confidential witness, although he had an opportunity to do so, and he never read his sworn deposition, which was verified. Mike Wallace went into great detail during this interview about how the gun was found in Foster's right hand. He said that critics of the investigation incorrectly stated that Foster was left-handed. Well, that misses the point entirely. When the confidential witness discovered the body, he looked very carefully. He was within 18 inches of Mr. Foster's face. He looked very carefully, and he saw no gun in either hand.
They went to authorities. They went to William Klinger. He was very important, Congressman Klinger. Why? Because he's a Republican. So he signed on to the Fisk report, and he became Mike Wallace's authority as being the person who validated the report and proved that Ruddy, who had done the investigative work, must be wrong. A very dishonest production, but reasonably typical of a lot of the work 60 Minutes does.
The pictures that you saw of his body, did they tell you anything?
Most critical picture, again, for me, is the indentation on his thumb, because this particular weapon recoils in a way that puts an indentation in your thumb. Now, it would be almost impossible to recreate that.
You would not get a mark on the thumb simply from pulling the trigger. That's not going to leave a mark on the thumb. What might leave a mark on the thumb would be the fact that the gun had laid in that position and in that area on the thumb for a certain amount of time, which might cause some sort of a mark or an indentation. But certainly, simply not from pulling the trigger. I've never seen anything like that.
They used a Republican congressman who, as far as I know, has no experience dealing in homicide investigations as their main forensic expert. I mean, it's laughable if you really look at that program.
Consider for a moment the 4 so-called experts chosen by 60 Minutes to confirm the suicide ruling. A congressman with no forensic experience who purposely refused to interview key witnesses during his investigation. A park police officer who was not a homicide investigator and who had never seen a suicide by gunshot. A doctor who had never conducted an autopsy and who was without legal or professional standing to render a suicide ruling. And an attorney identified as a White House surrogate who received a presidential appointment from Bill Clinton. Failing to uncover one piece of conclusive evidence that Foster killed himself in Fort Marcy Park, Wallace relied instead on Foster family attorney Jim Hamilton.
Yeah, Mike. For them to be wrong about this, all these people either have to be incompetent or they are engaged in a conspiracy that makes Watergate look like a minor shenanigan. But they're not incompetent, and there's no conspiracy.
Well, I wonder why a lawyer for the Foster family would be involved in trying to discourage an attempt to make a more thorough investigation of the circumstances of his death. And I think it's also a non-coincidence that he was appointed to an intelligence review board, which is a sort of plum position. At least it's a presidential appointment.
Wallace had falsely given his viewers the impression the case was closed. Not only was this untrue, but on the very day the program aired, Kenneth Starr's office was conducting a massive hunt for the bullet in Fort Marcy Park. Wallace knew this, but by deceptive omission, failed to tell his viewers.
60 Minutes did not tell the American public that there was an investigation going on. That was, I think, dishonest. They made it sound as if the case was closed and shut.
The U.S. Park Police, the FBI, the Senate Banking Committee, and independent counsel Robert Fisk have all concluded that Vince Foster killed himself.
I have never seen so much misinformation and so much bias in reporting as I saw during that 20-minute segment. Let me just tell you some of the things that happened. Mike Wallace, some of the things that 60 Minutes ignored. Mike Wallace said that every government body that has investigated the death of Vince Foster reached the same conclusion, that he killed himself at Fort Marcy Park. He did not mention that the independent counsel, Kenneth Starr, has reopened the investigation. Mr. Starr's attorney spent this summer questioning witnesses before a grand jury. The FBI is back in Fort Marcy Park, or was just a couple of weeks ago, more than 2 years after Vince Foster's death, looking for the bullet that killed him. Would the independent counsel go through all of this work if there were not unanswered questions about this case? And so I believe that Mr. Wallace was incorrect when he said that the conclusion had been reached by every government agency. In addition, many of us in Congress have come to different conclusions as well.
Ruddy's reporting for the Tribune Review outlined a number of serious problems with Kenneth Starr's investigation. Most notably, Ruddy had discovered that Starr's lead prosecutor, Miguel Rodriguez, had uncovered evidence that the FBI had deliberately distorted photos of Foster's neck in order to conceal an additional wound, which would have forced officials to change the ruling of suicide to homicide. After Rodriguez presented this and other damaging evidence to a grand jury, Starr forced his resignation and dismissed the grand jury. Starr's chief deputy and Rodriguez's superior in the Foster investigation was none other than Mark H. Toohey, an activist Democrat with close ties to the Clinton administration.
Professor Amar said we should seek a more representative jury, a jury that looks like America. I'm not sure what that means, but as an advocate, I don't want a jury rammed down my throat that thinks like America.
Toohey sought to close down the Foster inquiry and was later allowed by Starr to join the firm representing Hillary's former Rose law firm before Starr's very own office. Starr then brought in Dr. Henry Lee, O.J. Simpson's chief defense expert, to close down the Foster case. Mike Wallace, it turns out, had been given permission by Starr's office to work behind the scenes with Dr. Lee to help discredit Ruddy prior to the 60 Minutes broadcast.
You know, I was out at the park. Wow. As a matter of fact, I was out there with Harry Lee.
Well, that was before they started this hunt.
Mm-mm.
Oh.
No.
How long ago?
About 10 days ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, you see, you're privileged. They won't let anybody else.
I know it.
Those.
I know it.
In light of 60 Minutes' inability to provide one piece of evidence that Foster committed suicide in Fort Marcy Park, and despite their refusal to examine any evidence to the contrary, Wallace's astonishing introduction to the July 1996 rebroadcast of the segment was especially dishonest.
Foster's body was found 3 years ago in Fort Marcy Park outside Washington, and a few right-wing groups still contend, despite evidence to the contrary, that Foster did not commit suicide, that he was murdered, and that 60 Minutes was part of a cover-up when we failed to confirm foul play in our report last October.
Wallace began his career not in journalism, but in show business, as a game show host and as a pitchman for such products as Peter Pan Peanut Butter. In 1968, Wallace came to the attention of 60 Minutes executive producer Don Hewitt. Wallace's gruff demeanor made him a natural for the type of showboat journalism he quickly perfected. For CBS, it meant high ratings. Over the years, 60 Minutes has raked in hundreds of millions of dollars from advertisers and has established Wallace as one of America's top celebrity journalists. In a 1994 front-page story, the Washington Post exposed Wallace for secretly taping a fellow journalist in his office. 60 Minutes producer Robert Anderson, the same Anderson who produced the story on Vince Foster, assisted with the deception. Both were sharply criticized by CBS News president Eric Ober, who publicly stated that Wallace and Anderson had violated CBS News standards and journalistic ethics. Wallace admitted to the Washington Post that he had used unethical tactics in his quest for ratings, stating, "You don't like to lie baldly, but I have. It depends on your motive."
Tonight's honoree considers himself guilty of malpractice. Nonetheless, you may have read that it was with my knowledge and consent that we placed a tiny hidden camera in the drapes of my office to catch on videotape the answers to my questions by a female reporter who had agreed to talk to us on the record. What she hadn't agreed to was to go on camera. Unfairly, unethically. We decided we knew better, and so we taped her, though she didn't know it. We were certain that once she saw herself on the tape, she'd agree to let us use it. Malpractice? Absolutely. We had lied to an interviewee.
A much bigger scandal erupted in 1995 when Wallace lied about an interview he had conducted with a so-called disgruntled tobacco employee. Wallace, in an attempt to attack the Brown and Williamson Company, claimed the company's former employee was a credible and objective source. It was later discovered the employee was, in actual fact, a paid consultant on the 60 Minutes payroll, and Wallace had known it all along.
Why did you hire the source from B&W, Mr. Wigand, as a $12,000 consultant? And do you condone paying sources?
No, we do not condone paying sources.
In 1981, while preparing a program on insurance fraud, Wallace was caught making this racial statement. Blacks and Hispanics were too busy eating watermelons and tacos to read the fine print on the phony insurance policies. Wallace later apologized, but received no further reprimand from CBS.
I think it's amazing that a guy like Mike Wallace, who's considered an open-minded, decent, warm-hearted liberal, would refer to blacks and Hispanics as eating watermelons and tacos and therefore are too busy doing that to read insurance policies. That's an incredibly bigoted remark, and it's amazing that when someone who is a member of the liberal media establishment talks that way, he's very quickly forgiven and people sort of put it behind him and move on. And if a conservative journalist had said that, he'd still be excoriated and probably would have been fired and never heard from again.
In 1992, Clinton approached his friends at 60 Minutes and asked for a favor. Knowledge of Clinton's affair with Jennifer Flowers was about to derail his quest for the presidency, and Clinton was desperate for some media help.
And they came to us because they were in big trouble in New Hampshire. They were about to lose right there, and they needed some first aid. They needed some bandaging. What they needed was a paramedic. So they came to us, and we did it, and that's what they wanted to do. When I told Tim Russert that I was persona non grata at the White House, he said, "Why?" I said, "The Jennifer Flowers interview." He said, "You got him the nomination." I said, "I know that." As far as I know from the conversations I've had, Bernie Nussbaum knew that, Gergen knows that, Lloyd Cutler certainly knows it because Lloyd had a hand in his coming on there that night. You know, it was strong medicine, the way I edited it. He was a very sick candidate. He needed very strong medicine. And I'm not in the business of doctoring candidates, but he got up out of a sickbed that night and walked to the nomination.
Are you prepared tonight to say that you've never had an extramarital affair?
That allegation is false.
She was terrified. You know, an average person is not... Jesus, Mary and Joseph.
Wallace had boasted on national television of his friendship with Bill Clinton and has provided the Clinton administration with unbelievably favorable coverage. In return, Clinton has given 60 Minutes unprecedented access to the White House.
The way that the 60 Minutes is motivated is a question that should be raised in the minds of people. I don't believe in random incompetence at high levels of a profession like the news media. People don't become randomly incompetent at that level. They make a choice for a reason. And I think of the reasons why people make choices, and they normally involve some inducement about what they're trying to accomplish. It may be that they have some strong commitment to the Clinton administration, which is apparently true because Clinton has gone on 60 Minutes at many points when his political career was at jeopardy and has been bailed out by their softball questions. I mean, starting back from the primary in 1992.
The team of Wallace, Anderson, and Hewitt have continued to present false information to the American public and cover up the abuse of power in Washington. In April of 1997, Wallace treated his viewers to an extremely sympathetic profile of Webster Hubbell, the former Associate Attorney General of the United States, who had just been released from prison after serving 18 months for mail fraud and tax evasion. Hubbell, a close friend and confidant of the Clintons, had reneged on his plea agreement with Kenneth Starr, refusing to cooperate with the investigation. Hubbell had also given two completely opposite accounts of Foster's last days to the FBI and Senate investigators. At the time of the 60 Minutes interview, Hubbell was under investigation by a grand jury for refusing to cooperate with prosecutors looking into his possible acceptance of massive amounts of hush money following his resignation from the Justice Department. Compare Wallace's unreasonably harsh treatment of Ruddy, a dedicated journalist working on behalf of the American people, with his delicate treatment of Hubbell, a convicted federal felon who had betrayed his country's trust.
How bad was it in prison?
It was tough. It was real tough. It was, you know, it wasn't torture, but there were times that it was very, very difficult. Times you were scared.
And that first night, you were scared?
In a recent Playboy interview, Wallace admitted that for years he had sexually harassed his female co-workers at CBS. In the same interview, Wallace admitted to using illegal drugs, even with his own daughter and her friends. Wallace's casual attitude towards illegal drugs may have influenced his own decision to downplay drug charges involving President Clinton and his closest associates. In 1994, after evidence had already emerged documenting Clinton's association with international drug traffickers, 60 Minutes produced a segment featuring longtime Clinton financial backer Don Tyson, president of Tyson Foods.
So, if you spend money on politicians, obviously, you hope that you're going to make money because you have spent money on politicians, right?
Not to make money, just to make sure that you get a fair shake if you have a problem.
And the more money you give, chances are you're going to get a better shake because they're going to listen more carefully to somebody who's a big contributor.
I'd hope so.
Anything wrong with that?
I don't see it as part of our system, and I believe it's part of my responsibility.
Not only did Wallace brush aside Tyson's alleged bribes to Agriculture Secretary Mike Espy, he also failed to mention anything about Time magazine's report about Tyson's pilot, who admitted under oath to transferring cash from Tyson to Clinton. Wallace also blatantly ignored the reams of intelligence files from the Drug Enforcement Administration and the Arkansas State Police documenting Tyson's involvement in narcotic trafficking and murder for hire. One document revealed that Tyson had been kept above the law for nearly 2 decades because of his connections to Bill Clinton. 60 Minutes was well aware of the existence of these authentic documents prior to the broadcast. As with many of Wallace's most deceptive reports, the segment producer was once again Robert Anderson. Compare the difference between Wallace's treatment of Tyson, who at the time of the interview was under criminal investigation, and Christopher Ruddy, an award-winning journalist, simply trying to uncover the truth.
If I'd invested $1,000 in Tyson Foods, let's say 25 years ago.
Yes, sir.
What would it be worth today?
Over $500,000.
500 times?
Yeah. It's
in
a hell
25 years?
Yeah. Isn't that great?
You put them in the park, in a van or a truck or whatever, and you take them out of it in the parking lot, and then you lug them up the side of the hill, and give me a break.
What does it mean for all of us as Americans if the death of one of the highest officials in the land can be covered up by our law enforcement agencies? What does it mean when serious allegations of narcotic trafficking involving the president go unreported? The media cover-ups, so well demonstrated by Mike Wallace in 60 Minutes, is a warning to us all.
Ruddy has been able to raise all sorts of questions about Foster's death. We've dealt with the most important ones, we've examined the others, and as attorney James Hamilton says, the overwhelming evidence supports just one conclusion.
He committed suicide in Fort Marcy Park. That's the story.
I pointed out to him that, I said, Mike, you have said on this program that you considered all the important questions and you've answered them all. I said, the fact is that you didn't answer and discuss any of the important questions that I pointed out to you before the program. And the only one question that you did consider that was of any significance at all was the matter of the blood, which in fact they distorted.
One of the reasons why I've pursued this story with some determination for a couple of years now is not because it's an interesting investigation, an interesting detective case, but because this is a story about justice in this country. It's a case about how the law enforcement agencies that are there intended to serve and protect the American people, how they have been misused, that political pressure has been brought upon them, that this creates an extremely dangerous precedent if we allow this to go past, unchecked, unquestioned, unchallenged.
The Foster case makes no sense at all, and it's an insult to the intelligence of the American people and a threat to the future of our livelihoods, our families, and our investments, because it shows that the government is corrupt.
I think that the Foster case, shows that corruption is creeping into the judicial institutions of the country. Clearly, the FBI and the Justice Department both engaged in a cover-up in this case You had a special prosecutor appointed to investigate it who endorsed the cover-up. And I think that has to be nipped in the bud. If this sort of thing is allowed to occur with a senior White House aide, it's the beginning of a slippery slope.
The 60 Minutes part of the Foster story, I think, is even more threatening in some ways to the future of the country, because here you have one of the most respected, or once was, one of the most respected authoritative news programs. You have one of the most respected journalists in the country, Mike Wallace, putting his name, his imprimatur to this story and to closing it, when they know full well that there's many, many problems which they did not address. So this is an extremely critical case, I believe, for the future, to determine what type of country we want to be. Do we want to be another Mexico, or what used to be found in Eastern Europe, where unusual deaths were not questioned, that people knew that they should just look the other way and not ask about them? I don't think so. I don't think the American people, they want full answers. And the Founding Fathers, when this country was created, enshrined freedom of the press, not as the Second Amendment or the Third Amendment. It was the First Amendment. And I think it's evident why it was the First Amendment. Because it's very hard to have a free country if you don't have a free press.
We do connect with the audience out there. They perceive us as being very close to them. We are surrogates for the audience in the broadcast that we undertake to do.